You could be that monster. You could be that cop. And you're to decide in yourself not to be.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about a paper entitled The Uncanny. It dates 1919 by Sigmund Freud. So let's start by the definition Sigmund Freud gives to what uncanny is. The uncanny is a complex of phenomena that occurs due to the repression or suppression of a familiar content. When this familiar content returns as the return of the repressed or suppressed, it provokes different phenomena. Sigmund Freud even vinculates the idea of the study of the uncanny to an aesthetic dimension, that is, a dimension that broadens the use of psychoanalysis to literature, media, cinema, and so on. One of the phenomena or figures of the uncanny is the automaton. The definition of automaton for Sigmund Freud is an event, content, or experience that, on one hand, feels alive, however, it provokes doubt in the empirical judgment of the subject. On the other hand, the automaton also refers to when an inanimated object feels alive. In literature, there is this example by Albert Camus in his oeuvre or book entitled L'Estrangeiro, who, the main character called Neusa, he experiences a grief in a peculiar form. Neusa lives an automaton life, that is, a life that is lifeless, a life without emotion. When grieving his mother, he doesn't demonstrate no signal of emotions. It's almost as if he himself is a machine. However, Sigmund Freud himself gives him another example on literature regarding this phenomenon. The example is in the book by Hoffman, The Sandman. In this book, there is a figure that is a doll that the main character is in love with. He feels like the doll is actually alive. In Lacanian terms, the automaton concerns the presence of the other and its discourse. It is a presence of the exteriority at the core of the subject's intimacy. This experience agitates, unsettles, and even usurps the silence and ease of the subject. It's almost like the other is invading the subject's intimacy. In Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze-Guattari gives us an example of one of many psychotic patients, Lenz, the schizophrenic of long and interminable walks. At some point, this patient interrogates us. He asks, "Are you not listening to this screeching voice that extends itself beyond the horizon and is called silence?" In the example of the romance of Albert Camus, we can see the very much opposite. That is, a silence where should be unsettlement, grief, explosion, dismeasure. Another figure of the uncanny is the doppelganger. The doppelganger emerges as an effect of a splitting. This splitting concerns a period of the infancy where the child is understanding the difference of himself and the world, that is, of interiority and exteriority. At first, the doppelganger emerges as a narcissistic grant of the immortality status of the subject. The specular image, the shadow, the mirror illustrates well the understanding of the child towards the world, thinking the world is an extension of oneself. However, later on, the doppelganger becomes frightening because it is vinculated with images of repression, recrimination, punishment, such as the superego. The image of the doppelganger is not to be mistaken by the image of the ideal ego. The image of the ideal ego is an image that provokes and incites the idea of completeness, of narcissic omnipotence. However, the doppelganger is actually present within the moments where the self understands its fragility. Understanding that the self is not an unity, it's not coherent, it's not a totality or an image of completeness, but rather the opposite, incoherent, a play of forces, as Friedrich Nietzsche would say, and not at all an unity but an illusion, that the doppelganger gains a status of a phantom, a frightening, horrifying figure. The doppelganger appears in cinema and literature. In cinema, there is a great move entitled The Prestige, which exhibits the relationship a subject has with another relatable character. This identification is so strong that, at some extent, the subject experiences the other's desire. In the movie The Prestige, you can notice how the main character feels almost in a persecutory relationship with its rival. In the double, Dostoevsky also displays the same persecutory ambiance. It shows that what had been a motive, a familiar motive of joy, becomes now something strange, uncanny, horrifying, and even phantasmagoric. Up to this point, we have to consider that the uncanny is an experience that does not limit itself to psychotic structure, but it is present within any clinical structure, any Lacanian structure, that is, psychosis, perversion, and neurosis. Also, the uncanny demonstrates that the self isn't this unity image, this complete image, but rather it is a game of forces. If we are Freudian, we can understand the self as a terrain of conflict. So let's work with the third figure of the uncanny. There are a few more, but I want to focus and emphasize the work on this last figure because it is strictly vinculated with the hypothesis of Neusa Santos Souza. The main hypothesis here is to affirm racism as one of the figures of the uncanny. This hypothesis has been developed by Neusa Santos Souza, who was a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst in Brazil. The third figure is the feminine. In psychoanalysis, the feminine is conceived as the absolute alterity, the difference. It's references to the other sex, the other race, the other gender, the other mode of satisfaction, of jouissance. The feminine is the other which resists and opposes to sameness, to stillness, to the norm, to the phallic. It is the unmeasurable. It is the unthinkable. It is the singularity at its core. It is the expression of the most radical, intimate nucleus of the subject. It's what gives us passion. It's what pulses within us. In a sense, this field is a field where psychotics dwell. They dwell precisely because they feel like they counter the norm. They are the feminine. They are against, they oppose and resist the phallic subscription of the primal signifier, the signifier nom du père. Wolfson, who has written Les Schizeux et les Langues, is a perfect example on how psychotics dwell upon the feminine, this complete incarnation of the other as radical opposition. So Wolfson dwells with the screeching voice or screeching of the native language, of his native language. He feels like by listening to his native language, he feels like someone is slashing his ear with a dagger. His whole warfare involves this strange feeling towards his native language, towards his country, towards the norms of his culture, to the point that he wants to create a new language. But here is how he is compelled to experience the climax of this conflict. He indeed has a double task. On one hand, he needs to deconstruct his native language because to him feels uncanny, strange, nocive, hostile, like a screeching idiom. But on the other hand, by creating a new language, a language that only he speaks, he affirms his place in the strangeness, in the uncanniness, to the point where he is the absolute alterity. He is even incomprehensible. Corpo Santo, who was one of the greatest figures, the theater of the absurd, also displays the same intention, desire, or will to deconstruct the ancient orthography to create something new. In his word, let the new and fresh airs come to air out the old one, the familiar. Should a glimpse of novelty arrive, uncanny or not, it matters little. Let the uncanny be welcomed in the place of the familiar. So here is the whole hypothesis of Neusa Santos Souza. She highlights the fact the experience of the uncanny may be taken as feelings of loathing towards the world. She utilizes another paper of Sigmund Freud entitled On Transience. In this paper, Sigmund Freud works well the notion of transience of things, affirming that one needs to accept the ephemeral state of things. And by precisely accepting the ephemeral nature of things, that one truly manages to enjoy, because it is knowing that it will end eventually, that he can actually appreciate, give value, and feel satisfaction towards a thing. However, Neusa points out that afflicted by the transience of things, pain can also emerge as this loathing towards the world, in the sense that the subject experiences sad passions. Here she is referring to Spinoza's ethics. For Spinoza, sad passions are affections that mitigates the potence of the subject of experiencing the world, experiencing nature. The sad passions reduces the perseverance of the subject in the world, his ability to create, to connect, to expand himself, and his joy towards the world. If one does not accept or is not aware of the transience of things, he falls prey for despondency. And here is the central point. To Neusa, transience does not entail a devaluation of value, but rather the opposite. And she takes it from Friedrich Nietzsche. She says that the acceptance of transience of things is actually a transvaloration of values. It is due to the ephemeral and amorphous nature of things that we can give them new value, that we can attribute them new qualities, new modes of satisfaction, that is, new modes of jouissance. In the sense, she asks us, is it possible that the subject accepts the uncanny, the strange, the foreigner? Could he align himself with the joy of the new, of multiplicity, of different modes of jouissance, of alterity, of the tragedy of plurality? To her, racism would then be, by definition, the non-acceptance of difference, the not acceptance of multiplicity, the not acceptance of this uncanny that does not live in the exterior, but rather the interior at the core central of the subject's intimacy. In a sense, she defines racism as the dire mode of thinking and acting, the outcome of a totalitarian will and force that manifests itself in a double excess, in the attempt of excising the other from its modes of jouissance, and at the same time the imposing of one specific mode of jouir, that is, of having satisfaction.
I will leave you with the words of the poet James Baldwin.
Where would a fleeing black man go if he wanted to escape? There may not be, as much humanity in the world as one would like to see, but there is some. There's more than one would think. In any case, if you break faith with what you know, that's a betrayal of many, 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 many people. I may know 6 people, but that's enough. Love has never been a popular movement, and no one's ever wanted really to be free. The world is held together, really it is held together, by the love and the passion of very few people. Otherwise, of course, you can despair. Walk down the street of any city, any afternoon, and look around you. What you got to remember is what you're looking at is also you. Everyone you're looking at is also you. You could be that person. You could be that monster. You could be that cop. And you're to decide in yourself not to be.